You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to Thunderquack Perfect 10, the podcast where we explore pop culture masterpieces. I'm your host, Michael Cohen. What is a perfect 10? Simply put, a perfect 10 is a piece of pop culture media we love unconditionally. So throw away your review score because around here, everything is a 10 out of 10. On this episode, we're headed from the supercomputer into the net and across the web to talk about the very first computer-animated television series, Reboot, with the host of What the Force and metamythic expert, Marie-Claire. Welcome back to the show.
Hi.
It's been a minute. It's been a minute since you've been on. You were
been
on
2 years.
the second episode, yeah, where we
I'm
talked about
happy.
Lore Olympus. Yeah.
Perfect 10 is going strong.
I mean, like it. I love what we have been doing so much that the fact that we have a very small audience is irrelevant to me because this podcast is the most fun that I get to have recording because it's literally just grab a friend and talk about something that we both love. And I don't remember if I said this on the last episode that you were on when we talked about Lore Olympus, but like you were a main part of the inspiration for that because your catchphrase "Seek Joy," which you paraphrase and borrow from Joseph Campbell,
George Lucas.
Oh, George Lucas. Oh, sorry. Okay.
George Lucas paraphrasing probably Joseph
Yeah.
Campbell.
It goes back into that, right?
It's like very meta.
Yeah. That catchphrase of "Seek Joy" was something that when I was coming up with both this and then Force Perspectives as well, like that was sort of, I looked at that and went, that's kind of the mission statement is like let's do something. I don't want to get stuck in another thing where I'm talking about Arrow for 7 years and there are good seasons and bad seasons because like there's great ups and downs when we talked about Arrow and Quiver, but the downs are really tough. It's really, really tough to keep going when you've committed yourself to a show and it's, there's an audience and people love it. And you want to keep, giving that audience what they're there for, but you're not liking the show. So the thing about Perfect 10 was just like let's just talk about stuff that's awesome. Like, let's just talk about stuff that gets us tingly, and honestly, on that list, Reboot is like the number one TV show for me. So like it is my favorite TV show of all time. And I like unequivocally, like objectively, like it's at the top of the list. So to talk about it at length on the 30th anniversary basically is so great, and to do it with you is the cherry on top because I know we're going to get into awesome stuff. I'm sure that you've got some doozies ready.
It's story time. Well, okay, but let's just say, just for this episode, it's not just Perfect 10. It's also alphanumeric.
Yes, absolutely.
We have to use it.
Totally. All the great catchphrases from the show. It's so good. Okay. You know what? I can feel that we're going to like get right into it. So before we get into like the nitty gritty, I just want to give the primer. So what is Reboot? Let's travel back to a time when the internet was a novelty and the inside of a computer was a mysterious, potentially whimsical place where anything was possible. It's been 30 years since the debut of the very first computer animated television series, Reboot, created by Gavin Blair, Ian Pearson, Phil Mitchell, and John Grace. The series revolves around a group of sprites, humanoid beings that populate the inner workings of cyberspace, along with binomes, numerals, and of course, viruses. The Guardian Bob is tasked with defending the system mainframe from threats both inside and out, such as the virus Megabyte and the twisted hexadecimal, as well as the ominous game cubes inserted by the user. So grab your key tool and log on, because it's time to dig into the groundbreaking series Reboot.
You got to say it, reboot,
Yeah,
and then
Reboot.
like double click
Yeah,
your
double click
icon.
the icon. My favorite is I it's in season 3, and it's the first time that Cyrus, who is introduced near the end of season 2, or maybe even in the middle of season 2,
hmm
and he's a bad guy. He's a spy working for Megabyte, and so he gets stuck in a game with Enzo right after he becomes a Guardian, right? And he's leading like this propaganda campaign against Enzo, and they're stuck in this GameCube, and it's the first time that Cyrus has ever rebooted. He's never been in a GameCube before, and he's never rebooted. So he's unfamiliar with it, and they're like, you just double click your icon, say reboot, and he double clicks this thing and says beetroot, and
Yeah.
that joke has
But
stuck
he
with
only clicks it
me.
once.
Yes,
I
yeah,
noticed that this rewatch. I was like, "Oh, he only clicked it once." That's funny because
yeah.
they they don't always need to say it because like they double click Frisket's icon and he just transforms and
Yeah.
things like that. So,
um yeah, it's and I that joke is one that like there are several jokes. I mean, 99 is something that I say a
yeah,
lot of the things that Mike the TV says.
Mike the TV. I was like, is Mike
Yeah.
the TV like maybe Mike Cohen's like I don't know,
He's
like
like,
you as an
yeah,
animated
he's like my
character?
animus, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
he's very much, very much.
I was gonna
I
ask you that.
it's one of those things where it's like everybody's got their favorite characters in a show, and it's always like the characters that you wish you could be. I'm wearing my brand new Cyclops X-Men
Mm.
97 t-shirt today, and so I watch X-Men 97 and I'm like, yeah, I'm Cyclops, but I'm not Cyclops. I That's not true. I wish that I was Cyclops, but when I watch Reboot, it's like, I wish I was Bob, or I wish I was Matrix, or even, Megabyte to a certain degree. But in
Yeah.
reality, I am simply Mike the TV, and the remote control was lost a long time ago. But yeah, I okay.
Hey,
I,
part of the entire point of Mike the TV is to understand that he is still valuable. Everybody has value,
totally.
and that's important too.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's switch it from I'm talking a lot about Reboot, but I want to hear from you. I want to get into your history with Reboot, because before we started recording, you were saying that it's one of your favorite shows. So
Yeah.
hit me with it. Take us back to 30 years ago,
Oh,
1994.
1994, I was 12. So it hit
Okay.
me right at the what George Lucas calls the perfect Star Wars age, but it is also
Hmm.
the perfect reboot age in my opinion because
Yeah.
I was a mere age of 12. And 1994, my dad was super into science fiction, super into advancements in animation as well as storytelling, and so would kind of keep up with these things that were happening. And I noticed this show coming out. I watched the premiere, but then also he made sure I could watch every single episode regardless of whether I missed it or not because we had a VHS, and so we recorded it to make sure I caught every single episode because I loved it. um he loved it too, so we watched it together a lot of the time, and he really loved what they were doing with the show,
Hmm.
and so it was much like Star Wars for me. It was something I shared with my dad, but in general, it hit me at a particular time in my life. Being 12 years old, you are literally going through puberty.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? It is that period of time where you yourself are going through a transformation, and because it is such a new thing that you're experiencing with Reboot, but also your life is all of these things and all of these complexities and all of these challenges, like in really the start of the show, yeah, I really identified with Enzo and I really loved the character of Bob, and I idealized the character of Dot, like, "Oh my god, she was so competent." But then as the show develops, you kind of identify with different parts of the show as you're
Mhm.
also growing with the show. Like, I remember when 3rd season hit and yeah, I think okay, so 12, 13, 14. So
Oh,
I
not no, not quite, because the gaps in the seasons are longer than a year. So season 1 and 2, I think, are 1 year after the other, but season 3 didn't come for a couple more years.
it
So
didn't come
it's
for a couple of more years, but I
yeah.
remember thinking about oh, maybe I was in high school by that point, but yeah, it had been a couple of years and I probably hit high school at that point, but I also remember really identifying with Enzo and Andrea and being
Mhm.
like, "You're this child." But then all of a sudden, being in high school, you're an adult. All of a sudden, you're basically treated like an adult. And so it felt like that a lot to really give me that like feeling of how things played out as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Um but yeah, I was so into it. I collected the cards. I have them right in front of me. I showed Mike before we started recording. I watched every episode and yeah, if I was into fandom, I probably would have been writing fan fiction on the internet. But it was
Mhm.
an introduction to me wanting to engage on the internet so much that my dad was one of the first website owners in Canada. Like, we had a very small ISP in Camrose, Alberta, and he had his own website, and so I was like, "Can I have my own website?" And I literally the website is literally just one page with, a drawing I did in Paint of the mouse symbol.
That's awesome. That's awesome, because you
And
were a hacker, right? Because you're on the internet.
yeah. I
That's
mean,
all it
but
took back then.
I taught myself HTML to do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but my favorite character we've kind of talked about how you identify with Mike the TV, maybe you
yeah.
love Bob. I loved all the characters, but my absolute favorite character that, like, jived with me the most was Mouse because of kind of how she appeared and how complex she was,
Mhm.
early on. Of course, I love Matrix and Andrea as they grow up, and I love Bob and Dot and all of the characters, like, literally everybody I love so
Mhm.
much, but it was just, like, Mouse was the one that, like, stuck in my psyche, so
Yeah.
much that, like, I've thought about getting, like, the mouse symbol tattoo.
Mhm.
I used to draw it, like, on, like, my school books, like, it was everywhere.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's so funny because you say that, and it's like I totally see that. Like, I see you calling out that Mouse is your favorite character and the one that you identify with, and it's like you say that, and then I'm like, yeah, I see where that's like in some of your personality and the way that you do things. It's like
Like, I
because
think I played several rogue characters that were like Mouse in D&D
yeah,
when I was
yeah,
growing
yeah,
up,
yeah.
like, like,
That's so funny.
she would just, like, invade things that I was
Yeah,
into because she also didn't treat the world like Dot did,
yeah,
and that was so interesting to me. You don't see a lot of characters like her in cartoons
yeah.
at the time.
Both Dot and Mouse, and later Andrea,
Mhm.
the thing that I love about them as female characters written by men, um, is that like they were written, like Dot was written as a very like empowered,
She was it
she
feels
was
like
like
one of the original girl bosses,
yeah,
like, she
exactly,
had like, maybe we had, like, Angela from Who's the Boss, like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
we
There was
had,
a
like
yeah, there was a little bit of it out there, but it wasn't a very common archetype, and it certainly wasn't common within children's programming, right?
yeah.
Usually the girl was a token character, and
She would
she
have been
was
trashed on the internet nowadays.
oh,
Like,
oh my
people would have
god,
hated her.
unbelievably, yeah, like it would have been
I love
hashtag
Dot.
woke, all that stuff. But but then I love that the three of them being like sort of our three main female characters in the
Mhm.
show, they are all feminine, they're not just, gender swapped male characters,
Yeah.
which is what happens a lot of the time in children's programming, is Saturday morning cartoon stuff. But they're so different from each other, right? And the
Mhm.
ways in which their femininity comes out, as well as their like because they do, all three of them also have a lot of like very strong masculine components to them.
Mhm.
But though like all three of them present that in very different ways and
Yeah,
have
Dot is
different
very
strengths.
nurturing and protecting,
Yeah,
even though
yeah,
she's all about, like, success
yeah,
and wanting to do what's best. She also, like, tries to give back to the community and protect others, and that's why she's a logical, doc command.com,
yeah,
like, replacement for Fong. Andrea leads with, "Hey, my home is with Matrix, but I can take care of myself. I just choose to
yeah.
be here," right? And Mouse is very similar in, like, that she's so competent. That is
Hmm.
the thing that always defines Mouse, is that she's unbelievably competent, but she's also just kinda makes up her mind and is kind of like, I just wanna do this, so I'm just gonna do it.
Well,
And that, like, you don't see those characters very
yeah,
often.
she has a little bit of the wild woman archetype in there, right? and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that again, not something very common in children's programming for a female character. like
yeah,
like female characters were either like a mother archetype or a boy character with a ponytail, right? Like
yeah.
I so to have, I mean, like looking at Ninja Turtles, right? When they tried to bring in Venus in the live action television series, and what a failure that is, because she simply wasn't a character, right? Like
Mm,
she was just like, oh well, let's just put a girl in because there's a girl Power Ranger and we're trying to make this Ninja Turtles but Power Rangers. So they're like, we'll just put a girl in there, and there's not really any like depth to her or interest in her
mhm,
story. She is quite literally just there to be there, right? And that was, I think, the case in a lot of the shows, if they even bothered, right? Biker Mice from Mars didn't really have, like, there wasn't a female biker mouse. There was, I think there might have been like a female human that they associated with because it's very Ninja Turtle-esque, right? But like April is a, damsel in distress type character, a little
mhm.
bit of
Always
Lois
being
Lane archetype, but
yeah,
yeah,
rescued,
like
yeah.
um but the
Yeah,
very
that
first
that was not
episode.
Dot. That was not
No.
Dot. Dot would charge into the games with
Yeah.
Bob and was sometimes even more competent than Bob in some
Yeah.
situations, and, like, that's part of what is so powerful about especially the first season, even though it does have its rough edges because of
Hmm.
it being so new, but when you look at the history and the complicated history of
Yeah.
how Reboot came together, it it makes sense why it maybe feels a little rough in the first couple of episodes, especially the first 4,
Hmm.
because they were literally making it up as they went along. Nobody had ever done this before. They had to invent things from scratch. They
Yeah.
had to rely on the kindness of software companies. Like, it's quite literally a miracle the show exists.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is a really great point to bring up, the documentary that's coming out. So when this episode first drops, it'll be about a week away. But September 24th, it should all be on YouTube. And it's a documentary called Reboot Rewind. It's part of the TELUS Story Hive initiative. So TELUS kind of funds it, and then I think that's the YouTube that it'll be up on, is the Tell a Story Hive one. And they also have a website that I think you can go to. But I'm sure that come September 24th, you'll be able to just search it. But you can also find Reboot Rewind on all of the social media channels that you expect.
And if for
And
some reason you've never seen the show, please do check it out on Tubi. Like,
oh
it's
yeah, yeah,
free.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
and actually the interface is pretty good for Tubi. I was
Yeah,
impressed. I just
yeah.
watched it on
No,
my iPad.
it's great.
Um, and,
Um,
if you're looking at history right after you view this episode, Retrified Mag has the oral history of Reboot,
mhm,
where he interviewed, all of the, like, the four main creators, the voice of Bob,
Yeah.
and a few others as part of it, and it just tells you, like, a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that was happening and how they sort of made it happen, and then how Disney sort of stopped it briefly.
Yeah, tried to.
Tried to, yeah.
But thankfully, and I'm sure that a lot of this will be in the documentary. So I've seen the first two episodes of Reboot Rewind, because I went to a screening last week here in Vancouver with the creators of the documentary, and as a matter of fact, the original voice of Bob, as well as the voice of Slash, as well as Turbo, Gary Chalk, he was there as well. They were sitting right in front of me.
Oh,
Bob,
wow.
Bob, and Gary Chalk is also Optimus Primal on Beast Wars,
Mm,
Beasties as we know it up here in Canada. But
yeah.
I'm sure that the documentary will go into this in great detail when it gets there. But YTV is really like one of the key players here, and I think Alliance Atlantis, like
Mhm.
they made sure that season 3 happened, and then later on season 4, and there's a whole bunch of drama around season 4 as well that I cannot wait to see in this documentary and for them to dig into, and we can talk a little bit about it when we get to talking about season 4 and how that goes down.
Yeah.
But yeah, the behind the scenes of this show is actually, as much as I love Reboot itself, the behind the scenes is a way more compelling story because of how crazy and groundbreaking and pioneering what they were
Mhm.
doing in the initial phases of it, of just getting a computer animated series, even just to the point of anybody believing that you could do it, and allowing them to make a show, much less than actually having to execute on that promise. But then, by the time that you get to season 3, they were pushing children's programming in a direction that not a lot of stuff had done. I mean, we had
It was very
X-Men.
challenging.
Was sort of
Yeah.
X-Men was like on the edge of that, trying to do some of that stuff, but not really getting there. Gargoyles did a pretty good job, but Greg
Yeah.
Weisman eventually burnt that bridge and got. You can go back and listen to the episode with me and Candace Caw talking about Gargoyles, because we did that as a perfect 10 already. But Reboot, because it was kind of outside of all of those systems, I being bankrolled eventually by YTV,
Mhm.
which is youth television up here in Canada, which is a children's programming
And just remember,
network.
like, the reason it exists to begin with
Yeah,
is because Canada pays for art.
yeah, yeah.
Okay? So let's just talk about that for a quick second.
Absolutely, get into it.
At the time, the Canadian dollar was at 60 cents on the American dollar. Plus, over half of the show, maybe, I think they said in one of the articles I read, at the time when it was first produced, over half of the show was funded through government grants.
Hmm.
So, like, they made the money go.
Yeah.
And yes, they worked incredibly hard, round the clock. They begged, borrowed as much as they could to get the technology that they needed to get it off the ground. The original place of development really happened inside of a hotel,
Yep.
right, in Granville Island in Vancouver. And it was like, maybe it's not half, but it was like, and a huge amount was actually government grants and
Hmm.
money from the government to create art. And the fact that we do this, I know Jay Baruchel has talked about that a lot in regards to why he loves Canadian cinema and Canadian programming, is because we actually do a focus on art, and it is anti-fascist in its nature
Hmm.
to pay for art to be created, to
Hmm.
have a system by which people can essentially come from nothing and create something that never existed before. And we would not get the advancements in computer animation. I literally went to Despicable Me on the weekend. Like, movies like that wouldn't
Hmm.
exist. Clone Wars wouldn't exist. anything that came later than this wouldn't exist in this format because Toy Story, although they did create it, they lost it like twice or something
Mhm.
by the time that it actually came and produced. Like that sort of animation took a lot more time and they were able to sort of change how animation worked
Mhm.
from the traditional animation lens.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it is such an amazing story, and the documentary Reboot Rewind goes into such ridiculous detail on it. So
We
I'm
don't need to go
excited.
into it too much, but I
Yeah,
just wanna,
yeah,
like, pitch it, like, it is just sometimes you just have to, like, say yes
yeah, yeah. I
to
just
creating art.
it's because you brought up Toy Story, and I just look at it, and it's like Toy Story is considered like the pioneering thing, but Toy Story is a movie. It's a feature film, and they
Mhm,
worked on it for years and years. Um, and obviously Pixar deserves all of the credit that they get for all of that hard work and innovation. But Mainframe was here in Vancouver, and they were doing the same thing in a 22-minute
mhm,
format on a weekly basis, and
mhm.
creating all of the same stuff in like a very guerrilla indie fashion. And so I look at Mainframe and what they did for computer animation in the same way that I look at ILM and what they did for
Yeah. It
like
has the
cinema, for
same
film.
feeling of ILM.
Yeah,
Like, when you
yeah,
look at the stories and how they really were kind of like, there's a story about, a woman that nobody was answering the phones at Mainframe.
yeah,
And a woman was, like, showed like, a roommate of somebody who worked there, showed up one day and just said, "Hey, I'm dressed up. Do you want me to answer your phones?" And they're
yeah,
like,
yeah,
"You're hired."
yeah,
'Cause,
yeah.
like, they didn't have anybody to answer the phones, you know? I have to say, like, one of the most fascinating sort of, point to things that have happened. You know the
Hmm.
movie, Yesterday, where they say the Beatles didn't exist,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
you're the only person that remembered it?
yeah.
Well, it you can almost draw a parallel or a dotted line through history from Dire
Hmm.
Straits' video "Money for Nothing"
Yep,
through Mainframe to, uh, Fury Road.
yep, yep. Oh, I mean, like it's yeah, it's pretty direct. It's very direct.
Like, you can
Yeah,
be like,
it's
"Okay,
crazy.
if these 3 things if these
Yeah,
2 things didn't happen, you wouldn't get this 3rd
yeah,
very awesome film, and thus Furiosa that came
yeah,
after," right?
yeah.
So, I love this because this all started with the Dire Straits music video, which is
Hmm.
very like, you can imagine it in your head. You're like, "Oh, yeah, this, like, computer animated music video."
Yeah,
So 2 of the creators from that sat down and said, "We could do this as a television show.
yeah,
We could
yeah.
do this." But then it was 7 years until it was actually released. It took that long to, like, get everything in place, get the people, the production team behind it, get ABC to invest. ABC loved it in the first bit, right? So that's great. They produced the show, and then there is a brainchild episode or a doodle drawing that happened in
Mhm.
the first season that produced this episode that happens in the second season that inspired literally the creation of Fury Road.
Yeah, yeah.
I love this so much because how many other examples of these sorts of things probably sparked the imagination of so many creatives that either worked on it or were watching it at the time. Apparently, it was one of Bill Clinton's favorite shows for a while. He used to watch it all the time in the White House every week, the first
That's
2
crazy.
seasons.
That's crazy. Yeah, yeah. It's a really funny, like, reboots are really funny sort of cultural milestone.
Pablo
Um,
Hidalgo has talked about the show a bunch.
yeah, I but it just it always feels like it's overlooked. And it's
Yeah.
one of those things you mention reboot and everybody goes, "Oh yeah, I know. I remember that show." And you're like, "Yeah, no, I don't remember this show. I like it's a part of me. Like it's inside
Yeah,
my
it's
soul."
formative.
Yeah, like exactly. But it did, because it was the first computer animated television series. It just like it was notable. Everybody knew what it was, and it was on ABC. It was on Saturday mornings. But for us up here in Canada, it was. I mean, it was basically on every day on YTV.
Yeah. It was on
It
every
was
day.
their flagship
So even though he
for a
recorded
long
it for
time.
me, I could still catch up, and I feel like I've
Yeah.
seen the first 2 seasons, like, a crazy amount of
Oh,
times.
impossible to
Yeah.
know, right? Like
Yeah.
some of those episodes I have seen probably 100
Talent
times.
show.
Yeah,
I have
absolutely.
seen so
Yeah.
many times those 2
Yeah.
episodes I've seen so many times.
Yeah, it's I think for anybody sort of in our generations, like sort of especially like if if you were of that age, as you said, you were 12 and I was 9 in 1994. If you were in that zone, like really like 8 to 14
Yeah.
age range, um this show is like in Canada, this show is a part of you. It was
Yeah, it is.
inescapable. It was absolutely inescapable. It is a part of Canadian culture, to the extent that if you go to the Royal BC Museum in Victoria, and they have like a section that's like sort of like through the decades, and when you hit the 90s, there's a whole there's like a Nintendo and all of these things, but there's like a whole chunk of the display that's a bunch of reboot stuff, because it's like if you were a kid in Canada in the 90s, especially in BC, because the show was made in Vancouver, it's like, oh man, reboot was just a part of life. Like there wasn't anybody that didn't know what it was. So it's a really funny, interesting part of Canadian culture that I think is only now starting to get recognized as that.
Mm,
And if they were still making those part of our heritage shorts, you'd
it
have
would
to
get
make
one.
you'd have to make one about reboot, because it's like, yeah, it's
The
like
first
how we
animated show. I
yeah,
could even imagine how it would go, heritage moment. Uh,
yeah.
it's like the guys in there. It's like, "Are we gonna do this? I guess we're gonna do this," you know?
Yeah,
It'd be so funny.
two guys from the UK, well, three guys from the UK,
Coming to
that
Canada because 'cause we're cheap.
came to Canada, because yeah, and that's like literally the story is like, why Vancouver? Because everywhere else was too expensive, and they had the technical people here, the animators and the computer, like the technicians and engineers here in Vancouver, so it made sense.
Yeah.
It made the most sense.
Yeah, like
Um,
EA, that like some of the people came from EA, some of the people
yeah,
came from television, some of the people came from traditional animation, some people came like Hanna-Barbera has a big influence
yeah,
on Reboot. Um, and that gets me to like one of the other things about Reboot that we hadn't really seen. Like obviously Star Wars. George Lucas did homage to his favorites, like The
yeah,
Searchers and all of these other things. And, you know, he really wanted to make, you know, a different sort of movie. So he really inspired like his own childhood pulp fiction to be inserted into the story. But
yeah,
Reboot did that purposefully with direct
yeah.
references to pop culture. And this is a not a complete list because that would be too big, but it was like the major references that I caught while I was doing my rewatch. So Inner Space, Star Trek, multiple, metal music,
Yeah.
Mad Max, X Files, High Noon, Evil Dead, Mars Attacks, The Prisoner, Star Wars, Dune with Gede Prime
Mhm.
being of course, Megabyte's home place. Uh, Mystery Science Theater 3000, Stargate, Godzilla, Power Rangers, Spider-Man/Venom, Looney Tunes, Wacky Races, James Bond, Austin Powers, The Mummy, Pokemon, and the Blues Brothers.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, that's not even a
That's
comprehensive
not
list, right?
that is not a comprehensive list. That was just the ones that I was like, this is big enough to like put on my list.
Yeah, yeah, and that's and with that, we're talking about TV shows and movies, but like the pop culture beyond that of like the episode. I think the title is Number One, and it's they're in a golf game, and
Yeah.
all of the other golfers are jokes, like they, because
Like
one of
there's a
them's literally a
tiger, like
tiger,
Tiger
like yeah,
Woods.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, so like the whole series is just chock full of, it's one of those ones where it's like every frame, maybe not quite every frame, but like at least once an episode there's a freeze frame that you can do, and you can go like, there are three references in the background that are inconsequential to the story. Like they're just there. There's just like weird pop culture stuff all over. And then beyond that, if you are a Vancouverite, Mainframe itself and the segments, the pie segments of the city are actually like, a lot of them are inspired by literal places in Vancouver. So they'll be going around Mainframe, and you're like, well, one of them is Kit Sector, and Kitsilano
Yeah,
is
Kitsilano,
is
yeah.
is an actual neighborhood, right?
There was
So yeah,
also, a character, like a binome, like one of the zeros,
yeah,
who had a toque with a toque on it,
yeah,
spelling out the word toque so you
yep,
knew what a toque was, not a beanie. Like,
yeah.
it was it was a very specific choice. At one point in the end of season 2, you actually see a character holding a pamphlet, and then one says LA and one says van or something like that, like,
It's
because it was
yeah, fax modem, right?
fax modem, yeah, and he's like, and
The X
and
Files
so there was
character.
also, like, internalized,
Yeah,
the creators themselves were kind of making meta commentary of their own
yeah,
situation. I think it's at the end of season 2 as well. You literally have Hack and Slash say, "I hate LA,"
yeah,
out loud because they hate Angles, which is the
yep.
destroyed city that Hexadecimal lives in, but they're making a reference to having to deal with Hollywood and what they've had to go through to produce this second season and get it out the door.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's just, it's so full of it, and it's one of those things that
The
makes it
evil tanks are called
rewatchable, right?
ABCs.
Yeah.
I know that that's been there from the beginning, but I don't think
Yeah.
anyone caught it, like, oh, man.
Yeah, it's so full of it. And as an adult, you can go back and you can watch it, and you can like, you pick up on new stuff, and you pick up on the nuance of certain things. And it's, to me, on my most recent rewatch, which was about a month ago, um the thing that stuck out the most to me was how much of what's in season 3 is actually set up as early as season 1, right?
Yeah,
And even the
mhm,
stuff that's in the two movies
is
is
set up in
is
season
is
1.
also set up in the first season. And
Mhm,
it's like, as they went on, and they got a little bit more independence in those two later seasons, they were able to then take some of the ideas that I think at the time were considered like too much for a kids show, and they
mhm.
put it in. And the effect of that was that the show grew up with us, right?
Yes.
And I think, to me, like, that was one of the things that gave it the staying power that it had, and as well as like making it sort of that indelible thing, as opposed to a thing that just was important in youth and that you carry with you as this nostalgic thing. But
Mhm,
that's what tips it over the edge into formative, as well as perfect 10 territory for me, where it's like, Reboot ceases to be a TV show and becomes something cultural, and it
mhm.
becomes something that is so important to me and the person that I became. And for me, like, that's why it holds that status, right? Whereas other things that
Yep.
I love from that era, I wouldn't consider a perfect 10, right? But yeah, that's kind of how it gets there. Do you want to talk about like the seasons themselves, because we've kind of
Yeah.
we've kind of talked around it, but I know you've got some ideas on like the themes of the seasons and stuff. Do you want to get into that?
Yeah, I and some of this could be just because of, like, the restrictions that ABC might have put on them
Hmm.
or, the broadcasting code, of course, in the United States. There were certain restrictions that were put in place for some of these things,
Yeah.
but primarily the first season is about moving towards transformation, very much like we think about archetypical journeys of there's something wrong in your own home,
Hmm.
right? There is something wrong. And then there's something underneath what is wrong, but we don't dig too deep into that, except for in the final episodes. And what I loved about the final episode of season one, identity the two-parter identity crisis is and the lead up before that, which of course was talent show, you actually start to get continuity instead of
Hmm.
moving away from the episodic nature of the experience. The first half of season 1, you can really watch any episode and you're like, what happens before the other episodes?
Hmm.
Who knows, right? But as soon as talent show happens, that's when I messaged you and I was like, who does a mid-season
Yeah.
character redesign
On
in
the
a
first
television
season.
show on
Yeah.
the first season?
On the first season. Yeah.
And I've talked about this with regards to watching The Bad Batch, Star Wars, watching Clone Wars.
Hmm.
They tend to not do it for a while because when you create digital assets, you create the wireframes, you create like the animation itself, you create the different like literally everything that you
Yeah.
create becomes something that you can use again, and that makes the creation of the animation in a digital format cheaper. You don't have to redo it every single time. You've created it and now it goes kind of like into the costume warehouse basically, or
Hmm.
into the digital asset warehouse. So when you actually have to redo a character design like they did with Enzo in Talent Show, that actually costs money.
Hmm.
But they did it for the sake of the show to say, no, 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 no. It's actually no longer episodic. We're a continuous storyline. And
Hmm.
this is the start of that. And it
Yeah.
really is the start. When they did Talent Show, they were saying, no, 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 it's not your normal Saturday morning cartoon. I've listened to a lot of animation podcasts that talk about how when you have like Miraculous Ladybug, you can
Hmm.
watch pretty much any episode of the first 2 seasons of Miraculous Ladybug and it is episodic. It doesn't really matter where you catch in. When they actually start to change the story to a place where it's beyond episodic, you need to have the continuous storyline. The storyline itself advances. And
Hmm.
it trusted the audience by that point that they were ready for more complex things like exploring the possibility of failure in Identity Crisis,
Hmm.
which is a very hard episode to watch. Those 2 episodes.
Yeah. Yeah. And to this day, out of all of the episodes of the entire series, has the most terrifying user, which is the clown, right?
Yeah.
That clown user is a thing that like that's nightmare
It's like
fuel.
from It
Absolutely.
or something
Yeah.
like
Yeah. But yeah, those episodes, that two-parter is such a game changer. Pun intended on that one.
yeah.
I in the way that it elevates the show all of a sudden into this new place of like, this is not just fun. This is like,
Mhm.
that's not all we're here to do. We're not just here as an escape, or as a way of like ignoring our troubles or our problems, like that
Mhm.
two-parter. As a child, a literal I was a literal like 9-year-old watching that show and going like well, but like what is it, what is this about, like it
It
I put
asked
it in in the
questions that
same
it
zone.
didn't
Yeah.
answer. It
Yeah.
asked questions
Yeah.
that it didn't answer. It was like,
It leaves it
"Okay,
to you.
well,
Yeah.
like why is Dot this way?
Yeah.
Why does she have all of this like, she has to be perfect. She has to protect others. She has to do these things, and she can't relax. She can't let go. She can't do any of
Yeah.
these things." And also, just, like, unequivocally, I love so many episodes, but Talent Show is, like, deep
Hmm.
within my
Yeah.
soul
Yeah. Yeah.
as when Megabyte comes out of the coffin and, like, then Bob, like, says BFG
Yeah.
and gets a big guitar and they do a rock battle. I was like, "What is this show?" But
Yeah.
I love Talent Show so much because it's just, like, bizarre and weird and, like, just joy, and you had
Yeah.
singing on a Saturday morning cartoon, like, because Dot sings Alphanumeric, the
Yeah.
song that she
Yeah.
sings to and you're like, "Oh, wait, they love each other, Dot and Bob, but
Yep. Yeah.
we don't get any resolution."
Not for a long time. No.
My little shipper heart when I was
Yeah.
12,
Oh yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It's I mean like it's the same. I think Gargoyles is the same year. I think it's also 1994.
4?
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think it is.
Same thing.
And yeah, like it's so funny to me because it's like, yeah, those two shows in the exact same era, because I talked about this on the Gargoyles episode. Like Eliza and Goliath was my first ship. Like that's like
Mhm.
absolutely. And Bob and Dot right next to it. Right next to it. Like and I don't know, you'd have to look at the episodes and when they aired in order for me to determine which one of those came first, because yeah, that little sort of like almost kiss, she gets like right up and then she pushes him away.
Yeah, and then
It's
she
like
pushes him down.
it's like textbook. It's textbook. Like that is how you launch a ship, guys. Like that's how you do
Yeah.
it. You
Can
bring
you
us
imagine
right to
if,
the
like,
edge.
AO3 existed
Oh
that
my
time, or,
god.
like, fanfiction.net, which didn't exist until
Yeah.
later?
Yeah.
But, like, we got so much cool things, but the key themes of the season itself,
Mhm.
were patience and appreciation for other people's perspectives and talents, and we
Yeah.
see that strongly in the Bob and Dot fights, in
Yeah.
the dungeon episode with Mike the TV, and finding that even Mike, who everyone found annoying, Mike,
Yeah.
has value and had knowledge to give, and had, things to contribute to the challenges at place. We got an intro to, people who have alternative perspective, really alternative perspectives, with Mouse's introduction with the great
Yeah.
brain robbery. Um, Again, that inner space
Yeah. Yeah.
homage was just so good. It was so
Yeah.
good. And, of course, we have, um, just endless references, but it all ends with identity crisis, with effectively Dot going on a transformational, internalized underworld journey into the darkness within herself, and facing the chance that she could fail. She
Mhm.
faces failure head on and sees, like, the potential, and then is able to pull herself up and say, "Well, no, 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 no. We haven't failed yet. There's still time. There's always still time to
Mhm.
fight." And it's literally the thing that I think turns her, like, transforms her archetype even into, what she becomes, which is, eventually, like, the command.com
Yeah. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the
And
of
I
which is,
mean,
like, kinda like the leader of the entire system.
yeah.
Bong is, but he's not very effectual because he's very old.
Yeah. Um and patriarchal. So, that's
Yeah,
only
yeah,
going to
yeah,
get you
yeah.
so far. Yeah, yeah. It's so great because it is this thing that they plant again in season one, at the end of season one, that bears fruit midway through season three when we return to mainframe, right?
Mhm.
And we see that the thing that she feared the most in that
Has
two-parter
happened. Yeah.
happens, and she's like hanging on by a thread
Yeah.
when Enzo and Bob return. And it's like it's a thing that, like, talking about it, I'm like, I said, a perfect 10 is a thing that gives you tingles, right? And it's like
Yeah.
literally I'm talking about it and I have those tingles. Like it's that third season is so powerful. But before we get into season 3, which is one of the
Season
best
2.
seasons of television ever, let's talk about season 2. Because yeah, as a follow-up to that first season, and in the midst of all of the chaos of is this show gonna go on, or is ABC gonna basically just set it up for failure?
Yeah, and it's because
um
ABC was bought by Disney, right?
yeah.
And Disney
Yeah.
didn't need this show.
Yeah.
They had Toy Story.
Yeah.
They didn't need this show, right? But they were still making their little shows, and what is so cool is because this starts out from, like, the first episode, from the introduction of, the Code Masters, which we never hear from again.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it introduced to, okay, yes, mainframe has been this place, and yes, we vaguely know there's a place called the supercomputer, and
Yeah.
it is constantly under threat from the outside world. And if we think about this from, like a Joseph Campbell or an adventurer's journey perspective, or how sort of our psychology changes with story. This is the idea that now heroes need to care about the outside world beyond their gates, because
Hmm.
the outside world will continuously come to their world. We see that that was actually part of the original problem down the road in the movie. We see that, but they
Yeah.
knew that from the beginning. They knew what had caused all of these things. Um, Nimble's Diner.
Y-
They knew.
yeah,
They
yeah.
knew. They knew. Um, uh, but it's like the idea that the world is much larger than your own back door in
Hmm.
your own backyard. And it starts out, of course, sort of similarly with like megabyte shenanigans of stealing power, and we
Yeah.
get some of the coolest episodes, like the Codemasters, and like that introduction of like that idea. Um, Enzo being shipped to the supercomputer and becoming obsessed with the fact that the world is bigger than his own
Hmm.
backyard. So this
Hmm.
is where we actually get an introduction to Enzo being now, instead of Bob and Dot, Enzo being the primary hero. This
Hmm.
is the moment when he gets sent to the outer world. He actually has taken on the mantle of the hero because Bob and Dot have taken on the mantle of being basically the king and queen, or the rulers of Mainframe.
Yeah.
And that leads to their eventual that they sacrifices that
Well,
they make.
I mean, like it's so funny because Bob is a guardian, and when you talk about that, like as Enzo, and the talent show being that first episode that starts the continuity, which is literally his coming of age, right?
Mhm.
And
He
then
becomes, yeah, like
yeah,
basically a mini hero. Yeah.
yeah, he starts on his adventurous journey, and Bob becomes a threshold guardian. Like
Yeah.
he literally, both Bob and Dot literally stand in
Prevent him
Enzo's
from
way.
going in. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
and they have to be removed in order for Enzo to eventually become a guardian, and then in season 3, everything that happens there, right? Like, yeah, it's
yeah.
so, oh, man, it's so good. I love this
And
show so much.
let's talk about Bad Bob, because this is
Yeah,
again that through point to the creation of Fury Road. So,
yeah,
back in season 1, Brendan McCarthy actually unprompted drew a picture of Megabyte as a truck.
yeah.
Just like, I'm just gonna do it.
Just
And
because of the shape of his face. Yeah,
yeah, and eventually that episode became Bad Bob, which it was homage to Mad Max,
yeah,
and it almost looks like a cartoon version of Fury Road, which McCarthy eventually went on to co-write and
yep,
design.
yep. Like quite
Like it's like a
literally
trial.
the
Like it's
the yeah
crazy.
the plot of Bad Bob is the third act of Fury Road. Like
Mhm.
that, like in a very literal way, especially because McCarthy goes on to co-write Fury Road, right? And use like Bad Bob. I George Miller saw the episode
Yeah.
and was like, "This is fantastic." And then when it came time to make Fury Road, he basically hunted down Brendan McCarthy and was like, come write this with me, like let's do this, like, and that's how that movie exists. And Fury Road is one of the best movies of the last couple decades. Like, it
Yeah.
was so wild that it literally
But the
comes out
feelings
of an
of
episode of a show like this.
Fury Road, although simplified for kids, are
Yeah,
all there
yeah,
in Bad Bob. Like,
yeah,
so something has been stolen, something that
yeah,
is precious to the people of Mainframe, to the populace. There is a valuable thing that has been stolen, and it has been loaded into this megabyte truck, and it is on its way in this game. And the user is trying to get there with the energy, basically, so
yeah.
that he can win the game. And they have to turn it around and bring it back home and make sure it's nice and safe. The experience and the feelings that you get from a cartoon show that was animated so long ago are and it's no wonder that they could produce such a good version of that story as Fury Road, because they already knew how to do that with an
Hmm.
animated show.
Yeah.
Um, but that also starts the journey of those Threshold Guardians, because this is the episode that essentially, because he snuck into the game, Enzo, he now can no longer is no longer allowed into games.
Yeah.
They prevent him for the next couple of episodes until we are introduced to Andrea,
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
is Enzo's other half.
Yeah. Uh,
We also get introduced to a complex Wicked Witch version of hexadecimal.
mhm.
She was sort of more archetypically like a sorceress, like Circe, or
Mhm.
temptress, sort of chaotic introduction into Mainframe before. But then she's actually she ends up getting hurt basically in the season because of the introduction of the web and how the web is malicious to the mainframers and scary.
Mhm.
um Especially for the audience, this is really, really important because the character that when we talk about Enzo's heroic journey, it's important for the character to see that although he is the child character, he wants to go on the journeys. He wants to be the hero.
Mhm.
Um, for the audience themselves, who were you and I watching this, what you were like 10 or 11 by the
Yeah.
time these episodes came out.
Yeah.
I was, 13, 14. Eh, Enzo says something like, he's, like, stuck in this situation, and he's like, "I bet this sort of thing doesn't happen to Bob," but, like, literally, he's like, Bob is in an experience that was too hard for him to handle
Yeah.
at that
Yeah.
moment, at that, like, flashback, 'cause it was important for the audience as kids to be like, "Oh, actually, adults deal with crazy situations too, and sometimes it's too much for them to handle,
Yeah.
and it's just
Yeah.
through, like, their experience or their friendships or whatever, they're able to get through that." Um, and we get nonstop lore drop that only comes out in the movies, you know, this is all my dad's fault. Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
game sprites. We get all this understanding of how all of these things work together. They really thought through what they were trying to say and sort of had a plan from this point on. But Andrea herself is, of course, the thing that Enzo has been missing, in that he joins a game. He's been lonely because we find out that there's literally no kid sprites in
Mhm.
mainframe because of the destruction of the second city, which you find out, but you
Yeah.
don't find out about why until the movies, which is way
Yeah.
later. But yeah, Andrea, who is a game sprite, an AI, it's spelled like ANDRAIA,
Yeah.
like AI
And the AI when you properly write her name, the AI at the end of her name is
is
capitalized.
capitalized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
But she effectively is like a swan maiden. She is a fairy
Mhm.
creature that it joins him and becomes, for him, his animus. He is able, or his anima, he's able to actually um become a more complete person with a partner and with
Yeah.
somebody who is both has his back and also is working with him with his goals. Um it's not perfect because he still deals with a lot of stuff throughout
Yeah.
the seasons, like, emotionally.
Yeah.
But, yeah, we get a lot of different things from that perspective. We got, the Gigabyte episode, which was really, really important to see that Hex and Megabyte were actually sort of effectively like twins in a
Yeah.
way, like brother and sister from the same virus that split, and then when they came back together, they created Gigabyte, with this third piece to it, and that damages her, which opens up the, of course, she was damaged after that, but she was also the thing that, like, kind of brought in the web. We
Yeah.
find out that wasn't actually her. There's so much stuff going on. But in the end of the season, we actually have Bob being sacrificed for the kingdom,
Mhm.
and so that means he was the king at
Mhm.
that time. Um, in season 2, it really, like I said, shows the shift to Enzo, and then it's
Mhm.
formalized because Bob gives him his guardian code and basically says, "You're the hero now."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he literally says, like, we're about to go, like, this is about to happen. The web is about to invade. Literally, the stakes couldn't be higher. I
Mhm.
am giving you a field promotion. Like, I am
Yeah.
officially making you a guardian. If something happens to me, which the second he says it, you're like, something's gonna happen to
No.
him. If
Bob, no.
something happens to me, you are charged with the defense of the system. It's like, it's so good. It's so good. Like, it makes me emotional to talk about it because it was like it is. I think especially for a lot of like adolescent boys, like that's the dream, right? Your literal hero, the person you look up to more than anybody in the world, is like he gets down on Enzo's level. He takes his PID. He doesn't consult
Mhm.
Dot first. He doesn't talk to anybody else. He doesn't run this by Fong, the supercomputer, Turbo, nobody. Bob just says like, and like as you point out, he's the king, right? Like that's his
Mhm.
archetypical role here. He says there is no higher authority. I know what it takes to be a guardian. I'm
Yeah,
about to
and you're
show you
one.
what it takes. I know that
Yeah.
you have it. And he makes him a guardian, and his outfit changes, and
His outfit changes, yep.
it's just like
And
there it
and
is,
here's important, Glitch is left behind. So
Yep,
this feels almost exactly like, how, Luke is given the lightsaber, but he doesn't know how to use
exactly.
it.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's, because Glitch is actually considered to be, like a talisman, so a
yeah.
magical talisman, that only works with Bob. But he is, like, broken, basically, because Bob is separated from him,
Yeah,
uh, in the story. But the fact that Matrix has to work with all of these different challenges, right, than Bob, because it's his own story, and he is haunted by Megabyte. That is the groundwork is laid so,
mhm,
so early on in all of this.
mhm,
From Megabyte taking over his brain, and controlling him in the first season
yeah,
to all the way through the second season and the challenges of him fighting against Megabyte and never being powerful enough but then actually having it thrust upon him that he has to actually fight him directly and he is just a kid and Megabyte takes every opportunity to call him like delivery boy and
yeah,
like all of
yeah,
these things just to remind him he is this child in his eyes and not really worthy of being his adversary. Um,
yeah, yeah. I mean, Megabyte is just he's such a quintessential villain, right? Like,
oh, and,
um,
like, Tony
it,
J, like, playing
God,
his
yeah,
voice, I feel like we were so blessed to have his voice for so long
yeah, yeah.
in this character.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because both Reboot and Beast Wars have two of I think the greatest villains in Saturday morning cartoons in
Mhm,
Megabyte and then Megatron, specifically the Megatron that is in Beast Wars, who I think is like better than any other incarnation of Megatron across the entire Transformers mythology. And like I love so much of Transformers, but that Beast Wars Megatron, like he is such a great villain all the way through Beast Machines. So that's a whole other separate episode, whole diatribe to go down. But yeah, like Megabyte is is a mostly comical villain, but like in the first two seasons, but there's always this undercurrent of like a real
mhm,
danger, a real threat to him. And so then at the end of season two, when he unmasks essentially, and is like, because they have to work together in order to defeat the web, this larger threat. So it's like the
mhm,
virals and the mainframers are going to come together in order to do this. And then in that final moment when
and he betrays
Megabyte
everybody.
goes like, "What did you really think that I wasn't going to take every opportunity to take over mainframe? Like you're being silly to have trusted me
Yeah.
at all." Um, and
It's
it's
always, like,
like,
the thing that, like, we struggle with as good people is, like, we have to trust other people to
yeah,
get things
yeah.
done, and then the bad people, like, just go and do bad things.
Well, they take advantage of that trust, right? Like it's
Yeah.
like that's, and I think we look at the political climate right now that we're in, and it's like the warning signs are there in a show like Reboot of like, like this is what happens, is that like you stick to your morals, you stick to your ethics. And when we find out later in season 4 in the movies that Bob has
Mhm.
always had this ideology of like, but what if you could heal a virus? What if you
Yeah.
could what if you could fix a virus? Like even the worst are not beyond redemption, because Reboot
Yeah.
is the best show ever made.
Yeah,
Um,
like, even challenges Star Wars for
yep,
redemptive
yep.
storylines and
Um,
people.
Yeah, which is why like the way that it ends is hopefully is not an ending, and hopefully is still just a dot dot dot, and we get the conclusion to it eventually. But yeah, like season 2 ends on that, and like and breaks you as a viewer, because
Yeah.
you're like, our hero is gone.
And they use
Can
a character
Enzo?
scream perfectly because
Yes.
Dot screams.
Oh my god. Yeah, and it's
It
like,
hurts.
yeah, yeah, it's pain. That episode is painful. Like, it is painful, and it's like etched on my soul of, because that I wasn't a really a well, I guess, when is this one? This one's 90. This one would have aired in 96. So I was like
Yeah.
just barely into my Star Wars phase at this point. This is more an Empire Strikes Back than Empire Strikes Back for me,
Oh, it's so dark because we actually this
yeah,
is the start of the darker middle chapter
yeah, yeah,
of the journey, right? Like,
yeah,
this is key.
but Empire already existed, right? So like
Yeah.
the Vader reveal, all of that stuff is like in the cultural lexicon before I
Mm.
even entered into Star Wars as a thing. So I already knew Luke, I am your father, which is not actually the line, but like that cultural thing was already
Yeah.
there. But this was a thing where it's like, I remember watching this episode for the first time and being like, what the
What
hell
did they
just
do?
happened? And then it was 2 years before the show came back.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like it did not come back the next season. And like, I have always been the avid TV watcher that I am. And I used to get Disney Adventures, the magazine, sort
Mhm.
of like that digest magazine for kids. And I would look forward every year to that August issue, because the August issue would tell you what was coming back. And that was the only, we didn't have the internet. That was my internet, right? um and so I can remember like
I knew because it
that.
was published on the YTV website,
There
which
you go.
I knew because
I
I
didn't
had a
have access.
website.
I didn't have
I had the
access.
internet. It was painful to log on at that point.
Um so I remember waiting for that issue specifically to see if Reboot was coming back,
Oh, yeah?
because there was no other way for me to find out. And getting it, and there was nothing about, because I remember the other 2 seasons, they were in there. They were in Disney Adventures
Mhm.
because it was on ABC. So it was
And
like
then
part of,
nothing the year after, and
and
you're
then
like, "What
nothing
is
the year
happening?"
after. And I was like crestfallen reading it. I was like, there's all this other great stuff that comes out that year. But that was
I
like,
feel
it was
like
missing.
Beast Wars, Beasties was already
Yeah.
coming out by that point, so I was watching that.
Yep. And
Mhm.
Shadow Raiders, I think,
Shadow
came out.
Raiders. Oh,
Shadow
man, Shadow
Raiders,
Raiders.
which was
That
War
was
Planets in the States, but
so
Shadow
good.
Raiders up here. Because just
Like, all
literally,
the
like, they wouldn't allow the word war. That's why it was Beasties and Shadow Raiders, because they wouldn't put war in the title of a kid's
in
show
the title, yeah.
in Canada. But I think it was Shadow Raiders might have been the same year as season 3 of Reboot, because Matrix is,
It's,
and
1998. Yeah, because he was in
it's the year
both.
after. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, because he's the lead character in that. But yeah, like that wait for season 3, and when we found out, and I remember they announced it on the Zone. And
Oh,
I
the
think they
Zone?
announced it. Yeah, I think they announced it like before the summer break, that Reboot was coming back,
Oh.
because programming kind of shifted in the summer, right? Because everybody's
Yeah.
off school, so it's like that regular like afternoon 3 hour block kind of changed a little bit over the summer, which is when the Zone was, which was like, and it was hosted by Phil and Snit, right? The TV, that like talking TV thing. Um, but PJ Phil was like the host, and I remember, I'm pretty sure that it happened before the summer break, and they were like, by the way, in the fall, and not even in the fall, because it came back in the summer. It came back in August, I think. It was like, Reboot's coming back. Like Reboot season 3 is coming back, and I think they may have even like shown something, and it was like, the hype level was unbelievable. And I think it may have been one of the first times that I ever actually experienced that.
The
um
hype for a return of a
the
show?
Yeah, like something, or like
Yeah.
a trailer that was like this thing that you've been waiting for so long. Because to a teenager, right, 13, 14-year old at the time, it's like a year is infinity. It's an eternity. It is without end, right? A whole school year. You're telling me that, like, a whole school year without a new season of Reboot? Like, come on. Um, and so yeah, like I can remember talking with my best friend Bill and being like, Reboot's coming back. And when that episode premiered, like, we were sat for that premiere. It was a big deal. Like, it was
Mhm.
like announced ahead of time. There were commercials for it every day of like, Reboot's coming back. And watching that first episode back, where it was like, oh man, this is different, because it starts out, every episode before that, season 1 and season 2, starts with Bob. It starts with, I come from the net, through systems,
Yeah,
peoples, and cities, to
and
this
it
place.
it started with Megabyte.
Yeah, and
This is Mega
Mega Frame,
Frame.
and it was like, oh shit, you guys, like,
So
life
dark.
life changed in that moment for Michael Cohen. Like, that was like, because for me, like, that was puberty, right? Like, that's when it
Yeah.
hit, like,
But, like,
97.
again, this is such an important choice because they literally decided to change the characters. They
Yeah,
changed the scope of the story to match the fact that they were getting crazy syndication numbers. That's
yeah,
why they got renewed, right? Like, they were originally planning on doing basically a movie for season 3, but then, like, they were getting crazy syndication numbers. This
hmm,
show sticks with you. It's
yeah,
infinitely rewatchable. And so they wanted to grow, like, have the plot and the
yeah.
story grow with the audience. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's incredibly smart.
Yeah. Well, it's I think the best word for it from me is challenging, right? Like, it
Yeah.
it it puts the audience, especially that core demographic of the, like, 8 to 14-year-olds, into a position where it's like, guys, this is going to get uncomfortable. Enzo's going to
Mhm.
get hurt. He loses an eye. And
Yeah.
then we time jump, and he's Matrix, and yeah, he's cool, and he's badass, and he's got the gun, and the cyber
But he's
eye, and
actually
all
kinda
that.
damaged.
But he's so broken. He's so
Yeah.
broken. And it's this
It
it's
was
this
challenging.
lesson. Yeah, it's this
Yeah.
lesson for the audience, for young kids, and especially, like, for adolescents. For, like, I was right in the perfect zone for this, because it was like, don't be in a rush to grow up. That was
Yeah.
Enzo's story from the first season, the clock speed episode, where he's like, I
Mhm.
want to be smarter than
First
everybody else
episode.
now.
Or no,
Right.
couple episodes in,
It's
he
like
was
the
on it
third or
wanted to
fourth
be
episode,
smarter.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was a through line. And then Enzo finally got everything that he wished for. And it was the worst thing that ever
Nothing.
happened to him. He
Yeah,
became a
because he lot
guardian, and he
and
literally
all
grew
the
up
weight.
faster than he should have. He
Yeah,
literally
and
grows
all
up
the weight of
faster.
everything was on
Yeah.
his shoulders,
Yeah.
and everyone kept on turning to him for because he was the guardian, and he's
Yeah.
like, "I don't know
Yeah.
anything."
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and it oh my god, and it's so perfect how it plays out too, like, like, with him discovering the games and finally getting his groove, and then as soon as he's actually starting to get his groove, he fails because
Yeah.
he cannot win in the game that he is given because it's only him and Andrea and Frisket, and there's just not enough chances
Yeah.
to win. Um, and then we experience the most challenging thing that I've ever seen in a television show. They completely age the characters to adulthood,
Yeah. Yeah, but it's
and
so
it is
smart,
mind
right?
blowing.
It's so smart, because the audience that has been growing up with the
Are
show,
teenagers.
either they started as, like, pre-adolescent, as tweens, as we would now call them, right? But, like, you started there, or maybe a little bit older, like you did, right? And then, by the time that we get to season 3, you're an older teenager, and so you're no
Mhm.
longer, your aspirational characters are no longer the kid in the show.
And not
But
even Bob and Dot because they were
yeah,
kinda, like, boring by that point,
yeah,
right? Because 'Cause
yeah,
they're all about responsibility. It was so smart to be like, "Okay, you're suddenly you're a kid, and then suddenly you're treated like an adult, but yet you don't have anything together." You
Yeah.
don't know what you're doing, and
Yeah.
you're kind of just making it up as you go along.
Yeah, and
And
your emotions are in charge, and you
yeah.
yeah, like, yeah, it I'm so interested to see the rest of the Reboot Rewind documentary to see how much of this was actually intentional in the writing and how much of it was just, because sometimes this
Felt
stuff,
right.
this mythical stuff just makes its way in, whether you want
Yeah.
it to or not. And when the
Because
story is
you're
organic, it happens,
creating
right?
art,
Yeah.
you're just kind of vibing with life experience sometimes, and
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be purposeful, but
Yeah.
choosing to do like in the first season when they did the episode where they are challenging Dot's internal psyche.
Yeah.
They do that in episode 3 or in season 3 with number 1,
Yeah.
right? They have an internalized journey into the darkness of self. So it's the themes of course are about, don't be a rush to grow up. What it actually takes to get where you need to go, the stick to itiveness of sticking with your goals. And then also that once you've transformed, the goal is to still go home.
Hmm.
And Andrea and Matrix are stuck at this point of the denial to go home until that
Hmm.
number 1 episode.
Yeah.
And the number 1 episode is so weird because it's based in The Prisoner, which no kid would have ever seen.
Oh, no. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? But
Yeah.
obviously the creators loved The Prisoner or loved what it could do with
Yeah.
the show.
Yeah.
But it also has this like golf game like motif, like
And
how's your
and
back nine?
yeah,
Like
and a
jokes.
very, very heavy Star Trek influence as well. Like
Oh,
they
heavy
it
Star Trek
like TOS, right?
influences. Yeah.
It is one of those episodes that as a kid I hated. Like I hated that episode. And if it was on, I was like, I'll watch something else. But now as an adult when I watch it, and this is the great thing about like going back and exploring the things that were important to you as like in your youth, in order to unpack some stuff and figure some stuff out for yourself as an adult. So now as an almost 40-year-old, I to look at it and go like, oh man, but this is like there's so much meat here. This episode is so good. And it's like if I'm gonna rewatch something from season 3, that's one of the episodes that I can't miss. Right. Because there's so much going on. There's so many layers to it. The characters, and it's like how the dude that looks like the Punisher is a foil for Matrix. And
Well, and
like
like also how they get into it, and they reboot and they become megabyte and hexadecimal.
yeah. Yeah.
And that is the fear that he has on the inside. He fears because he has changed so much
Yeah.
and he is all about killing that he has become the thing that he hates the worst. This is a shadow episode. He's
Yeah.
dealing with his own shadows just as much as Identity Crisis dealt with Dots.
Yeah.
So we can like legitimately see who the main characters of each season is
Yeah.
based on who gets the internalized journey.
And it's so good because it sets that up and it explores it for you in that episode in great detail. And it but it's resolved to a degree, but not entirely, because
No.
once they find Bob, Matrix can't be in the same room with him at first,
Yeah.
right? And there's a whole plot line in an episode where Andrea's like, she literally has to say to Bob like, you really need to go talk to Enzo. And they
Yeah.
have a conversation where he's like, look at what I've become. I'm worried you're going to be disappointed. Right. And it calls back to that season 2 moment where he's like, you're a guardian now. And it's like, I charge you with the defense of the system, and he fails. And then
Mhm.
he has to but he finds Bob. And so that's a success. But in that success, he now has to confront his failure to
To
do what
protect the
Bob charged him with
system.
doing. Right. And he's
Yeah.
like, I let you down. And then Bob's like, not at all. Like
Yeah.
you found me, and now we're going to go home and everything's going to be all right. And
Yeah.
yeah, like it's so good. There's so much depth to it. It's crazy to me how layered it is, and how much my love of this show informs the things that I'm looking for in other shows. And it's
Yeah.
and for me, it's why I can very confidently say that Reboot is my favorite show of all time, because the things that I love about everything else that I love are in the third season of Reboot. Like
Yeah. The
it's
3rd season
in
of
there.
Reboot is
Yeah,
so it's hard to beat. I also think that, like, dealing with Matrix is like, he feels like he's just built for violence, and that,
yeah,
number 1 episode, um, really challenges that because he's like, "No, you're still Enzo. You're still
yeah.
this child, and you had to do what you had to do."
It is such a condemnation of toxic masculinity in an era where that wasn't even a phrase yet,
It
right? Like
wasn't. Yeah,
like
like,
like
literally,
like
like, this is your main character, this is what you're selling the show on, and you're saying he's wrong
yeah,
for, like,
and
wanting to have a gun, wanting to be this strong guy, that
yeah,
he has things he needs to work on, and he needs to go home and heal, basically. Like, that's what they're saying is, like, "You've been on this journey in the underworld, you've been
yeah,
basically lost." For like lost wandering the underworld, wandering the games, traveling the games. Like you need to go home so that you can actually heal and rest.
yeah, yeah, and
Wild. And you
it's
need
such a
community. You need community.
unique community, and it's like it is a condemnation, like I said, toxic masculinity, but like patriarchy as well, right? And
Yeah.
Megabyte represents the patriarchy because he's domineering, he's controlling,
Yep.
he's all about power. It's all about getting to the supercomputer to spread his influence,
Power,
his control, and his
control,
power.
domination. Yeah.
And that's patriarchy, right? And what's the last line of defense against that when they get back? It is literally, it's
Women.
Dot and Mouse. It's the
Yeah.
two of them. And like Hack and Slash have been essentially destroyed. And I mean, like, it's a little bit attributed to Fong, because Fong's the one who goes and pulls them out and rebuilds them with the purpose of, like, you guys are to protect Dot, and he reprograms them and gives them new purpose. They're reborn, right?
Yeah.
But like, the purpose is, like, you Hack and Slash used to be the bodyguards, the enforcers for the patriarchy, and
Yeah.
Fong, in relinquishing his role as the patriarchal figure of Mainframe and giving it to Dot as command.com, right? They are repurposed to protect the matriarch, right? They're
Yeah.
repurposed to protect the feminine power, which is the thing that's actually ultimately going to save everybody, right? Is them and Andrea. Matrix only survives the games because of Andrea,
Yeah.
because of the feminine, because he has this
Because
counterpart
there's
to
a
him
balance then,
to
right?
balance him and
And
complete him,
yeah.
right? Like, yeah,
And what's interesting is that there was actually a lot more women writers in 3rd season.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And you can tell
it,
because
it shifted a
I
lot.
mean, they're in the credits,
Yeah,
but actually, like, there is a lot more of that, and, like, Dot breaking down several times, even though
yeah,
she's got a really hard job to do, like,
yeah,
I just it's such a complex and beautiful show,
yeah.
and it all leads up to this, magnificent 3rd season, which then they succeed against Megabyte with Hexadecimal's help after
Hmm.
returning. The
Yeah,
return is so cool. Like it's like science fiction 101. The web writers, like Into the Web, Ray Tracer, like all of that stuff is so cool. I'm
so
obsessed with
good.
that period of time. They return back and it it's hard. Right? Like they
Yeah.
return and it's like hard. Megabyte's in control of everything. Everything is terrible. But they're like, you know what? We can do this. We can get this all under control. They managed to get Megabyte shot into the web.
Mhm. Yeah.
And they're like, okay, but everything is broken. And they do something that very few shows, and I can only name like a handful of them. And off the top of my head, I can only name Shira,
Yeah. Yeah.
have been brave enough to do, which is the community has succeeded. They have brought the elixir home. And so they experience a magical rebirth.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I mean, it's the name of the show, right? They
Reboot.
they reboot the
Reboot the
whole system.
I remember seeing this, like,
Yeah.
live and, like, Reboot, yes, YES, and I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and
"They
but, like,
said the thing."
yeah, like I said, like it explains so much about the things that delight me and disappoint me in the media that I pursue
Mhm,
as an adult. Because there it is, right? Hexadecimal is given a PID so that she will survive the reboot, she will survive the rebirth, and like
mhm,
continue on. The whole system is rebooted, everything comes back. Enzo is given a second chance. Like he
mhm,
because his PID is in game sprite mode, so it doesn't register him. So like everybody else who was killed or
mhm.
lost in the war, it's like everybody comes back. It's the it, I don't want to
It's sort
get
of
into
like
it.
what we've always
It's
wanted, but from so many shows
I mean, it's what we
and
wanted
movies,
from
yeah.
Rise of Skywalker, right? Like it's
Yeah,
literally the end of season 3 of Reboot is what when we talk about Rise of Skywalker and why it falls short for
because
us because it
magical
doesn't for
healing
every
should
but yeah,
be magical healing.
if you're going to call it the end of the Skywalker saga, then all of
Yeah.
the damage that happened throughout the Skywalker saga has to be undone. And Reboot had the guts to do what Star Wars didn't, because what Star Wars should have done, and we don't need to go all the way down, but what Star Wars should have done is Alderaan should have been restored.
Yeah.
Palpatine should have been healed, and in doing
Mhm,
so, Alderaan, the entire the system from I can't remember the name of it right now, from the Star Killer base destroyed.
Hosnian Prime.
Yeah, Hosnian Prime. That whole system should have been restored. Like there should have been magic, right?
Yeah.
It should not have just been a simple mechanical thing of defeating the Emperor with a bigger
Mhm.
Kamehameha than his, right? Like because that's what it was. The end of a Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah.
Although I used to say that, and then I rewatched Dragon Ball Z, and I didn't give Dragon Ball Z enough credit back in the day. It's also incredibly mythic,
Yeah, it
and like
is.
there's so much going on in Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z that I didn't understand when I was watching it as a teenager. But and also the Canadian American dub was awful, and if you watch Uncut, it's a completely different show. But yeah, like that's what it should have been, and that's why like I think like loving something like Reboot, and Shira is another really great example of it.
Yeah.
Like loving these types of stories and then seeing Star Wars, which is sort of the thing that we put on this pedestal above all of it, because it's I mean Reboot is inspired by it, Shira is inspired by Star Wars, you can
Yeah.
see it, it's right like it's in the fabric of it, right?
Well, like,
So when
a
Star Wars falls
guardian
short,
is a
yeah,
Jedi.
it, exactly, and the key tool is a lightsaber, right?
Yeah, like,
Like
that it's
represent
the
like
talisman.
mythically that's what they represent,
That's what they
and
are. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
um,
and in some ways, Bob is even, like, more Jedi than all Jedi,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because he allows himself to love, but he also has his to mend and defend, right?
yeah, yep, yep. He has his guardian code, right, and he can't go
He even
against it.
saves bad viruses several times.
Yeah. Well, that brings us into season 4, right? Which season 4 is divisive, I think, amongst fans. I it season 4 is choppy. Season 4 has a rough time, but in rewatching it recently and
Mhm.
going in with a new lens and as an adult and trying to really understand what they were getting at and the reasons why they told the stories that they did, I actually have a new appreciation for it. And I think one of the biggest things there is that like I mean that was 2001, so I was 17, I think, when that 16 or
That's a
17.
that's a rough time to watch the
Yeah,
the
and it
movie.
was and it was a disappointment, and I think this is one of the reasons why I can really empathize with a lot of the guys online that have a problem with all these rebooted shows and series, and whether it's
We're
Star
not even gonna
Wars
get
or
into the Guardian
MCU.
code. We're just gonna ignore that
Yeah,
they
no, no,
it
no, no,
exists?
we
Okay.
won't. But
Okay.
season 4 of Reboot is a thing where it's like coming off of season 3, which we've just like gushed about. Season 4 is fine. It's all right.
Yeah.
There's some good stuff in
Um,
there, but it's like it's also a little bit it's rocky. It's not as solid as those other seasons.
I
But
I mean, I kinda look at the movies separately, right? So the first half of the season
yeah,
is one movie, the second half of the season is a separate movie. So the first movie itself is Damon Rising. It is the story of how a virus has taken over the good-intentioned Guardians
yeah,
and, wants to capture Bob
yeah,
as the, key to being able to take over the rest of the internet
yeah,
entirely. Like, at
yeah.
that point, they actually understood what the internet was,
Yeah,
and
and we got our a visual representation of Earth,
of Earth on on
in
it,
the
and we're
final
like, "Wait a
episode. Yeah,
second,
yeah,
fourth wall breaking for real." They broke the
yeah,
fourth wall so much in the first 2 seasons.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but it's about the fact that, yeah, once you have the elixir, you actually need to bring it to others and
yeah,
heal others, and so that's actually Bob's love, and so Bob is actually the main character again.
hmm,
Bob's love of everybody
hmm,
is given to hexadecimal, and
yeah,
hexadecimal is able to heal the world through that. And
yeah,
that is also friggin' magical.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and it's so funny because one of the things about Damon Rising is that like there's a very very heavy allegorical element to it in representing Catholicism, basically evangelical Christianity. Yeah,
Evangelical Christianity that,
yeah,
like, it's only the word that matters, not necessarily the doing, and
yeah.
it's there's a lot of allegory. Yes, you're
And
right.
it's
There's
funny,
a lot happening.
at the time I was very heavily into my Christianity, and going to youth group and going to church every Sunday, and so I didn't see it as an allegory. I just saw it like I didn't understand. And I didn't as a teenager. I didn't have the context or understanding of the actual impact of the church in order to unpack what they were talking about. But now, after I've done my own deconstruction and
Mhm.
reconciled my faith with Christianity as a religious institution and where those two things overlap and where they diverge, um, now I can watch that and I can appreciate the nuance of that storytelling and the allegory that they were going for.
I
But it
think
was
there's a
so
lot
far
going
over
on in
my
Damon
head.
Rising. It's
Yeah,
really such a
it's
good
very good.
movie.
Yeah,
Like,
it's very good
like
in that way.
that 4-episode arc is so
Yeah,
good, and it's complicated and hard and, again, complex. It grew
yeah,
with the audience itself. And then we have My 2 Bobs, which I feel you have to view it as they were trying to relaunch the adventure.
yeah,
So you have to view it with that lens because it does end on a cliffhanger, and it is very, very challenging to
yeah,
say to it's it's asking the question of, if you've experienced so much trauma, isn't it easier just to try and forget the trauma?
yeah,
And it asks it through our main characters going back to Bob and Dot again,
yeah,
essentially saying, this is the problem at the core of this relationship within the two of them is Bob has changed. He has gone through things that he can no longer go back to. So
yeah,
has Dot, but she doesn't want to admit that she has changed. And that maybe the two changed people actually do make sense, but she has all of this fear and all of this, like, literal trauma from 4 seasons of Reboot
yeah,
and
yeah.
beyond, which we learn in, Damon Rising. We learn all about, like, like, what she's gone through since her dad, was trying to do a good thing, but kinda messed up by accident.
Well, I mean, the this is one of those interesting things that I think that had season 4 continued in the way that it was supposed to, because there's supposed to be, I think, two more movies,
Mm,
but it got cut short, obviously. Uh, is that I think the biggest revelation there is that it's it's Bob's experiment with Kilobyte that actually caused the explosion.
yeah.
I can't remember their dad's name right now, but
Waylon?
Waylon, yeah, what he did was
Just
almost
an
like
accident.
coincidental,
Coincidence, yeah.
it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
just serendipitous that
Bad
like they were
timing,
running the
yeah.
test at the same time that Bob was doing this very controversial, very dangerous thing in the supercomputer. And so he shows up, and the thing that I love about it is that Bob knows from day one that
He
the
caused this.
destruction of the Twin City was his fault. And he's been
Yeah.
carrying that
Yeah.
secret the entire series. And
Yeah.
so like the conflict between him and the other Bob, it kind of like that, I think like that was to inform that. And
Yeah.
then I think that the next storyline would have been like the beginning, like I think it would have come out, and then the following one would have been like a resolution of that
Yeah.
between Bob and Dot, that
Yeah.
of like her
Where they
forgiving
actually
him
ended
and
up
him forgiving
together.
himself. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That
No, I
yeah,
agree. And the hunt itself, which is such an interesting, because that's how it ends, is basically
yeah,
Megabyte calling a hunt.
yeah,
Um, there's some really challenging things that are in place in this movie too, because you quite literally have people who were healed, quote unquote, from being essentially fascists
yeah,
as under Megabyte, who want to go back to being fascists. As soon
yeah.
as the opportunity presents themselves, they want to be
God,
reinfected. And it's like challenging stuff that
yeah,
we see in the internet today,
yep,
right? That it's really hard to get that taken out of you if you've basically plugged into the propaganda of um how some people will influence you to think a certain way and to hate a certain thing,
yeah,
right? And it's a slippery slope to into fascism, essentially,
yeah.
because and these little pine gnomes like want to return to fascism. It's
I mean, yeah,
wild.
the comfort of taking orders, right? Like, oh, everything.
Yeah.
Man, I was talking with somebody an American friend the other day, and it's like we're friends because of mutual interests, like nerdy stuff, right? And I
Mhm.
was talking to him, and this came out of nowhere, and he was like, politics came up, and he made the comment, well, when Trump was president, it was cheaper to fill my tank with gas, and food wasn't so expensive. And then like I explained to him, well, economic effects are delayed, so that was actually Obama's presidency that you were experiencing the effects of, but like
Mhm.
he was expressing the same thing, right? Like and it's like
Mhm.
it persists because it's like for some people fascism is just easier. Tell me what to do.
Mhm.
Tell me how to
And
live my
also,
life. I
and
don't want to
blaming
think
other
about it.
people for your
Yeah.
problems
Yeah.
that are different than you is easier than facing your own problems. And so,
Yeah.
I do kind of view these as separate stories, because you kind of have to in some
Totally.
ways, because like the movie one, or the first half of the season, is about healing the whole world and giving the elixir to everybody. And like in the end, like you could literally call it there and say that's the end of,
Yeah.
like, say, reboot OG. And then
Yeah.
the second My Two Bobs story is like the problems never leave. They
Yeah.
just transform, and you have to continuously fight them. And it is a very challenging story that sometimes the problem is hidden for a little
Yeah.
while,
Yeah.
right? And you have to uncover it. And um I mean, Bob does his own like journey thing where he essentially like freezes himself in
Yeah.
rock, trying to, separate himself from this magical mantle, like this Jesus persona that
Yeah.
he's taken on. He
Yeah.
no longer wants to be Reboot
Oh
Jesus.
man. Luke on Octo. Like
Right? Yeah,
it's
like
right there.
he
It's right
he is
there.
he is quite literally like gone into
Yeah. Yeah.
like like he's gone into like his hermit like situation to
Yeah, I don't
transform.
want to
And
I don't want to I just want to be Bob. I don't want to be a legend. I don't want to be a god
yeah,
anymore. Yeah,
I don't want
separate
to
me
be a
from my
god
key tool.
anymore.
Yeah, cuz when he joins with the key tool and becomes Glitch Bob, it's like oh,
Oh, that design
that
was so
moment,
cool.
oh god, it's so good. That moment is like the height of storytelling. Like he does that and then he's like, "Don't worry,
Oh,
I
this
got
is
it." And he clears all the little what were they called? The pixels from the ship,
yeah.
and then cuts through Mouse's defenses and stabilizes the tear, and it's a portal back to mainframe, and he
But
just does
it
everything.
comes with a cost.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So he's kind of like a mage at that point, like, he
yeah.
definitely is, like, he kinda goes back and forth between his archetypes a little bit in the end because he sort of becomes this all-powerful, like, Gandalf the White character. Like, he's
Mhm.
Gandalf the White
Yeah,
archetypically by that point, and then
yeah.
can't seem to figure out his place in the society when he returns, and even Dot's like, "You're kind of a god, like, I can't really,
Yeah, I
I
it
love
well,
you, but I can't relate to you, and, like, you're
she
kind of at
says
a
it to
different
Mouse,
level."
right? Like, she says, "I can't look at him without seeing everything horrible that has happened," and it's like,
Yeah.
so he's Bob has gained all of this power, but that power, all it does is remind the one person that he loves the most of all of her trauma and the worst parts of her life, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's, yeah, like what a catch 22 on that one, right? Yeah, definitely challenging stuff for a 15-16-year-old to be confronted with, because like that is an adult story. Like, that very much is like something that as an adult now I watch it and I'm like, man, this is so good. And
One of
I'll
the
relate it to
lines Megabyte
TLJ.
says
Yeah,
oh,
sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. One of the lines at the end Megabyte says is, calls reprogramming a fate worse than deletion,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
He
And,
doesn't
like,
want to be healed.
he
Yeah,
doesn't wanna be healed, like, even though, like, that's what, has happened to Hexadecimal and it has been successful, and he like, I seriously do think that Bob, like, regrets, like, having to use Hexadecimal to save the world.
yeah,
Like, I really do think, Bob has so much carried on him that,
yeah,
of course, this is what the next movies were gonna be about, dealing
yeah,
with all of the things that Bob has had to decide to do, and yet he is still a good person.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's so good. But I was gonna say, like in relation to TLJ as an adult story, and it's like, I why some people can't handle the Poe Dameron stuff, and that is because, like, it's, again, it's challenging, and it's challenging on an
Mhm.
adult level to be like, hey, I you've got everything it takes to be the one of the greatest heroes in the galaxy, but like, you got to let go of this patriarchal control thing and like being the
Mhm.
coolest dude, and you got to give a little bit of your power up to the people around you in order to be a good leader. That's what it is
Yeah.
like, being a good leader doesn't mean being the coolest guy and flying the fastest ship and all the stuff that
It's
makes
about
Han
making
Solo
everybody
cool.
around you better.
It's about lifting up the people around you, and it's about recognizing when you are, not the right person for the job and somebody else is, right? Like,
Yeah.
recognizing, seeing Ray and recognizing that Ray is actually the future, right? That Ray is actually the thing that's this woman is actually going to be the
Mhm.
thing that saves the galaxy, not you and your X-wing, right?
Yeah.
Your X-wing being a metaphor for something very phallic, which is what Leia is trying
It
to
gets
get across.
destroyed.
No, yeah, yep. Not everything is about getting in an X-wing and blowing stuff up. Like, you gotta stop leading with your genitals and start using your brain and your heart. Um,
Oh,
yeah,
man.
no, and so like that's the thing. I look at TLJ and I'm always like, that's why I love it so much. Was when I unlocked that part of it and I was like, oh, it's what on my first viewing rubbed me the wrong way, and I'm now connecting that experience into season 4 of Reboot, where like when I
Mhm.
saw it at first I was not ready to learn, and
Yeah.
it's the metaphor, when the student is ready the teacher will appear, and that's not about, like, people hear that and it's like, oh, so that's when Obi-Wan Kenobi shows up, and it's like, no, Obi-Wan Kenobi may have showed up way earlier in your life, you just weren't ready for his lessons yet. And then as an adult, or whenever you hit that stage, you look back at it and you go, oh, wait a second, I've actually already learned this. And then you just have to
Right.
internalize it, right? Like, you just have to
Yeah, you actually have
incorporate it.
to take time to think about your
Yeah.
past and be
Yeah.
like, "Well, maybe this was actually a different experience than I thought it was."
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
Reboot continues to challenge in new lenses. I got a lot
Yeah.
out of rewatching it this time because, I hadn't seen it since the 90s and 2001 when the
Yeah.
movies, premiered. And, just seeing the mythic and psychological motifs that were present, how they use the references to essentially shorthand a lot of things.
Yeah.
It is a
Yeah.
it is a shorthand to use something like inner space. Oh, we know
Yeah.
what inner space is about, or,
Yeah.
X-Files, like that
Yep.
X-Files two-parter at the end of season 2, with Fax Modem
Yep.
and Nully.
Data Nully. Yeah. Data
Data
Nully.
Nully, yeah.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
this is why we communicate in memes, right? Like that's why the
yeah,
internet has become communication in memes. And it's so funny how prescient Reboot was in that way of understanding memetic
yeah,
iconography before we even
knew
had
what
it.
it was.
Right?
Yeah.
It
Like,
understood the
there
power
are
of a
memes
GIF before
in
a GIF
Reboot.
was a thing. Yeah. 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 There like are literal moments that are like, yeah,
Yeah.
like images popping up that are like just to quickly communicate a complex idea with a single image, which is what we use memes for, right? Yeah, yeah, it's an incredible show in that way. And it connects into my second favorite TV show of all time, which is Community, which is also metamythic,
Mm. Mhm,
right? Like that
mhm,
it's a
mhm.
like Reboot is a metamythic
Because
Saturday
Dan
morning
Harmon
cartoon, right?
specifically used, the sort of uh, each episode, Dan Harmon uses a journey
Yeah.
sort of plot
Yeah.
and says, "Okay, we're going from the normal world to the unknown and back again."
Yeah.
Every episode.
Yeah.
And he specifically uses that
And
to
every
frame all of his
subplot,
stories.
yeah, every subplot in an episode has to have the story
Yeah.
circle, and he frames it. This is why Community is so good, and other shows that try and do this fall short. It's not a template.
Mm-mm.
It is the way that you check your work. It's
Yeah.
flipping to the back of the math book and going, did I get the correct answer? If you
Yeah.
just flip to the back of the textbook and you just copy the answer down, you didn't learn anything. You didn't go on the journey. There is no journey. You fail, right?
And
Like,
that's what Joseph Campbell, and also Joseph Campbell would recommend, as well as George Lucas would recommend. He would
yeah,
say, I would write and then I would check.
yep.
And then I would be
You
like,
lay it
okay, that's
over
what
your
they're, and
story.
maybe you
Yeah,
tweak, right? You
yeah,
tweak to enhance, or you add more symbolic elements,
yeah.
but you write first because you have
It,
to pull it from the language of the night,
yeah,
as
yeah,
Ursula
yeah,
K. Le Guin would say. It has to come from within. So I
yeah,
wouldn't be surprised if I both would and wouldn't be surprised if they, had known more about sort of mythic motifs or
yeah,
psychology when they were writing these stories, but either way, they were plugging into just good art and good story
yeah,
and wanted to
yeah,
tell story about characters who struggled with things. Like, we wouldn't see essentially Dot cry so many times, or literally Matrix struggle with his own, like, harm that he does,
yeah,
if they weren't tapping into something deep within themselves.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, they had a story to tell. This just happened to be the way that it came out, right? Like it was
Yeah.
just the medium to send the message, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, that's I mean like that's great storytelling, right? If you have something to say, it doesn't matter what form it comes in. It doesn't matter how janky the animation is in season 1, and like there are literal errors in animation throughout season 1 because they
And
were
season
figuring it out,
2.
and season 2.
Yeah,
But
Bob, like, gives him his guardian code, you can see
yeah,
his original icon, like, on his forehead as he transforms.
yeah, yeah.
Like, little things, like, but it doesn't matter because it's still a beautiful show, it was ahead of its time, it was glorious.
Yeah, storytelling is king, right? Like it
Yeah.
transcends. If the storytelling is solid, Ty and I were actually going back and forth on this on Twitter a couple weeks ago, talking about it, and cringe in the '90s in TV shows, and the fact that like we can't handle
Allow
cringe
cringe
in our
anymore? Yeah.
stories anymore. And the reason why it was okay at this point in time that this show was, because there's a lot of cringe in Reboot, like what we're talking about with the graphical issues and stuff,
There's poop
is
jokes all over the
yeah, it's full of
place.
cringe. What we would define now as cringe, right? But we look past it. We look past it in Star Trek and how hokey it can be because the stories are so solid. The characters
Mhm.
are so solid that like it doesn't matter how hokey that one scene is. It doesn't matter if there's a bad performance from a guest star or a child actor. Like we look past it because when it gets into the heart of the story, it connects. And if that only happens if that story is coming from inside, right? It
Mhm.
doesn't happen if that story is a formula that a studio or a network is trying to achieve, right? And that's like,
Mhm.
it's what's missing in a lot of what's happening in a lot of these big franchises right now. I hate that I'm saying that because I love these big franchises, but the reality is that like
Sometimes
the MCU, yeah,
just
it,
having a hope and a prayer and a story to tell is actually better.
it's better than having a plan. It's better than having
Yeah.
a plan for sure.
Sometimes, because the
Yeah.
iteration, and this brings me back to this like metaphor that I go back to when I talk to people about podcasting a lot. Like I give
Mm.
advice sometimes on people like how do you become a good podcaster, Marie-Claire? Oh, I don't know. You podcast. You
Yeah.
podcast until it's good,
Yeah.
right?
You
Like
do it bad until you're not bad anymore.
until you're not bad anymore. And it's
Yeah.
the idea of making pots. So if you give two artists
Yeah.
1 month to make a perfect pot, one artist might spend an entire month making a perfect pot.
Yeah.
And then the other artist makes 1,000 pots in that month.
Yeah.
But that 1,000 pot artist is probably going to make a better pot by the end of the month.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just
One
make
of
it
those
until
thousand. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, you make until it's not terrible anymore.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
create, right? That's how you do it. And I think that like as much as we love the character of Andrea, AI art, generative AR art, using AI for storytelling doesn't actually take into consideration that humans themselves, when they iterate and they learn from their own creation and they advance with their own skills, um, it, it's so cumulative. It's exponential in
Mm-hmm.
growth.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these people that were behind this creation of this story came from other projects and just poured so much love and trial and error into it that it just became bigger than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
It really did. And we're getting very close to talking for so long that I do want to ask you, what are your favorite one-liners from Reboot?
I, man, I and almost everything that Mike the TV says is something that just like it just connects with
Bucket o
me.
nothing.
Yeah.
It's absolutely nothing.
Anytime that he looks down the barrel of the camera and talks to the audience for a second is just like that. You're talking to me and I am you and we are one. But 99, 99, 99, which is in and of itself a reference into RoboCop, and into
Yeah.
the omni global consumer yada 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 of that storytelling. But I man, I'm having a hard time. I'm kind of drawing a blank. I have
Stay
like
frosty.
feelings of it. Stay frosty is a catchphrase, and people who listen to Thunderquack will know that I use it at the end of every episode of Off the Record, which is our Patreon podcast. And it is something that like you remember when all the keep calm and
Yeah.
whatever carry on posters, everybody was doing their things. I did a keep calm and stay frosty poster on the internet fact, and it didn't catch, but like every once in a while it'll actually like show up, like I'll see somebody repost it and I'm like, oh, that was me. Yeah, stay frosty is a great one. Alphanumeric is just such a great random like internet type thing to say before the internet was even really a thing.
Yeah.
um but yeah, Beetroot is probably my number one. Beetroot,
Beetroot.
man, Beetroot. Every time I talk about Reboot with somebody, I have the it's literally I have to fight the compulsion to go Beetroot. Um,
I
yeah,
like the renames of all of the things, right? Input, output,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
basic. Like, how basic can you be? When I was a kid, that
Oh,
was like
oh,
such a
for
good
sure.
joke.
Yeah,
Like, I
yeah,
loved it. It did not translate to some people at school. Um, um, this is bad. This is very bad. And like Bob saying, I don't think so, was so
yeah,
like
yeah,
cool in
yeah,
first season and then cringe in the second season.
yeah. It's so good.
But I really love "We Need a Plan."
Yes, Yeah.
I just
That's
love that.
great.
Or
Yeah.
who's got a plan? Dot's got a plan. Like
Yeah.
I love that callback to like the whole time that there's like this idea of being intuitive versus planning, and that
Yeah.
there's like a balance between those two things that everybody seems to struggle with. But one of the things that I absolutely love that Reboot did was they did the recap song at the end of
Yes.
the 3rd season.
Yeah.
Alphanumeric, the song, which was set to Modern Major General,
Yeah.
from Gilbert and Sullivan's Pirates of Penzance, and like that, and the Avatar, play episode, like the Ember Island player episode where they
Yeah.
see the
Yeah.
whole thing, like, whatever that trope is, I just need more of it in life. Like, it's silly and I love it, but
Yeah.
it's so good.
Yeah. Play within a play is absolutely one of my favorite tropes. Which is Shakespearean, right? It's
Yeah.
Hamlet. The play within a play, and I talk about this all. I say this to Joe a lot on Forced Perspectives. One of my favorite literary devices is a foil. I
Yeah.
love a foil, man. Like a good foil. Like you tell me a story, and I'm like, that character is that character if he made that decision differently, and I'm like, yes, eat it up. It's one of my absolute favorite things, and Reboot is just full of it, right? But
Yeah.
and it's one of my favorite things because when I learned about it, when learning about Hamlet, I was like, oh, this is so interesting that we can like explore the psyche of a character by looking at another character and juxtaposing the two, because I live my
Mhm.
whole life in compare and contrast to fictional characters. That's how I
Mhm.
determine, whether I'm on track, making right good decisions. I say all the time, what would Obi-Wan Kenobi do? Like that is a common phrase for me in my head. And yeah, so like all of that, and there's so like we talked about it, Matrix and Megabyte,
Mhm.
and him rebooting as Megabyte, and us like looking at
That's
it and
such
going
good choice.
yeah, it's so good, it's so good. Like this is one of those things, we've talked for 2 hours and we could probably talk for another two. I mean, if we wanted to go in depth on every single episode, we could. And the fact that I've
Mhm.
never done a reboot podcast is such a wild thing to me. But it's also one of those things of like, that would be such a massive undertaking for me because every
'Cause there's
episode
so
would be
many
2 hours.
Easter eggs and references and
Yeah.
thoughts, and, like, the games within the games
Oh my
themselves
god.
are challenging
I
in and of
mean, yeah, we've
themselves.
we've barely even talked. We talked so much about the actual like in universe stuff. We've barely talked about the games, right? And the games
Yeah.
themselves, every single one is an allegory and is thematic to the message of the episode.
Yep.
Yeah, there's just layers upon layers upon layers. It I have absolutely no problem saying to anybody under any circumstance, Reboot is my favorite TV show of all time. And then when they look at me quizzically, it's like, listen, do we have time? Do we have time to get into it? Because I'll learn you something about it, but I don't know if everybody wants to indulge me in that hyper focus. Like, let me info dump why Reboot is the best. But that's why we're podcasters, right? So that we can info dump to an audience that is like, I choose to be here and listen to this.
And thank you for choosing to be here and listen
Oh
to,
yes, thank you so
Mike and
much.
I, enjoy the, discussion of the very alphanumeric
Yeah.
reboot.
Um, before we close it out, is there anything that you want to tell the audience about? Where can they find you on the internet?
Where can they find me on the internet? Oh, I'm about, normally on things that are called What the Force.
Yeah.
You can find me. I also have another channel that I occasionally post on when the mood strikes me called What the Fiction, where I talk about not Star Wars. And yeah, everywhere that is Marie C. Gould or What the Force is where you can find me, the podcast for Star Wars, thus so named.
And what I will say about What the Force, which is one of my like top 5 podcasts that I listen to and enjoy and love so much, is that um, there are a lot of podcasts where it's like, oh, like what's the latest episode, and I'm gonna jump in and start listening now. What the force, many of the episodes. I mean, you've got your topical stuff where you're doing like recaps of
Mhm.
episodes of TV shows and stuff, like we all do, but so many of the deep dive episodes are timeless, and
Yeah.
episodes that you can go back and you can listen to more than once. It is an
Or I find, like,
education.
something new has come up in Star Wars, and I'm like, "I did
Yeah,
an episode on that, and oh my god, that was actually, like, perfect that I did
yeah,
that, like,
yeah,
3 years ago." What?
yeah.
Like,
Completely unrelated,
mines.
right? But yeah,
Mines.
yeah.
Mines are such a significant theme in Star Wars,
It's
and, like,
yeah.
nobody talks about it. But
And
I talked about it.
every time it crops up, I'm like, that the MC, she's right. It's there. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I will say any episode with you and Ty or Missy,
Mm.
I go listen, and people will know. Perfect 10 listeners will know Ty and Missy because they are frequent contributors over here, and they are, listen, no shade to anybody else, they're the best episodes. Those are the best episodes of Perfect 10. So if you really want to go into Perfect 10's back catalog and listen to older stuff, they're the best ones. They are also, I for this season, the ones that are coming up, they are the ones that I am very, very excited about. I love that you and I kicked off season 3 of Perfect 10 with a conversation about Reboot, because season 3 of Reboot is the best season of that show, and I am aiming for season 3 of Perfect 10 to match that. Um, all of the
I'm very proud of
episodes,
you for keeping this up for so long,
yeah.
that I appeared on the 2nd episode of Perfect 10, and I hope to appear at least once a season going forward.
Oh, for sure, yeah. That it would, yes, that will be a thing. But the rest of the season is all it's determined. We know
I'm
what
proud
it
of you.
is. Yeah, and I just have to actually record it with everybody. But if you go to our social media, you'll be able to check out the lineup for the rest of the season. But I will tell you right now that the next episode will be in October, and it'll be Missy and I talking about Prey, the Predator
She
prequel.
told me about this.
Yeah, she
I'm
has been
excited.
bugging me about it for almost a year, that she wants to do this episode, and it was gonna be in season 2, and then she and I just never managed to find the time to
Mhm.
record it, and then I went on the extended hiatus for Perfect 10, and I so it if not for the fact that Reboot was celebrating the 30th anniversary, and I said something about it, and you were like, "Oh, Perfect 10 episode," and I was like, that's the season premiere. If not for that, Prey would have been
It's,
the season premiere of season 3. So I'm really excited to
it's
talk to Missy about
serendipitous that
it.
this
Yeah.
actually came together at
Oh
this
yeah.
moment because
Yeah.
I was so busy, but this is good. So
Yeah. Yeah. We did it. We did it. We managed it.
we did it,
Um,
team. We did it.
but we got lots of stuff that you and I have talked about doing episodes of in the future. So you'll be back. You'll be back. It's a as I like saying to the audience, it's not a promise, guys. That's a threat. Marie-Claire and I will be back, and we have some
Yeah.
doozies of topics that we want to talk about. That'll be even crazier episodes than the conversation we got into here. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, MC,
You're
for
welcome.
hanging out and talking about Reboot. It was so great. It was everything I hoped it would be and more. And that's all I ever ask for on Perfect 10, which I know is asking for a lot, but my friends are awesome. So that's it for the episode, guys. Thanks for listening to Thunderquack Perfect 10. If you found joy in today's discussion, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast service and leave a rating and review. Want to chat about today's episode? Head over to our Discord at thunderquack.com/discord. And until next time, remember, it's not about the score, it's about the love. Stay frosty, everyone.
Perfect.
Thunderquack Perfect 10 is hosted by me, Michael Cohen. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at TQPerfect10, and join the community at thunderquack.com/discord. This podcast is supported by listeners just like you over at patreon.com/thunderquack. Head over there to get early access to episodes, exclusive podcasts, and more. This show is a part of the Thunderquack Podcast Network. Head over to thunderquack.com for more great shows. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.